listen closely. What I'm about to say was never meant to be spoken out loud, because once you hear it, you can't unhear it. And once you see it, you can't go back to sleep. Every civilization, every dynasty, every bloodline that ever ruled understood one brutal truth. Power begins with hierarchy, and hierarchy begins inside the family. Long before empires carved borders into maps, control was practiced at the dinner table. Who eats first, who speaks without interruption, who is protected, and who is expendable. This is not modern psychology. This is ancient engineering. In Rome, the paterfamilias held absolute authority. One child was groomed to inherit, another was trained to serve, another existed only as leverage. In medieval houses, one heir was crowned by birthright. The others were sent to war, monasteries, or marriages designed to be sacrificed. In royal bloodlines, favoritism wasn't cruelty, it was strategy. And here's the part no one tells you. That system never disappeared. It just went quiet. Today, it doesn't wear crowns, it wears smiles. It hides behind words like responsible, strong, independent. When a family decides, consciously or not, who comes first, they're not choosing love. They're assigning function. One becomes the protected asset, another becomes the emotional shock absorber. One is allowed to fail loudly, another is trained to survive silently, and the most dangerous role of all is the one who is always fine, because history shows us something chilling. The person who is last is not weak. They are being conserved. Empires did this with soldiers. Churches did this with believers. Institutions do this with workers. Families do this with children. You are told you are strong, so you won't ask. You are praised for independence, so no one has to show up. You are trusted with pressure, so others can remain comfortable. And when the truth finally slips out, not shouted, not screamed, but said calmly, casually, like a law of nature, your sister's family comes first. Flee, without ever making them important. That role kept the machine running. They called it duty, they called it honor, they called it family. But beneath every name was the same function: absorb risk, carry weight, protect the favored line from collapse. This is why the last one is always described the same way: strong, low maintenance, doesn't need much, can handle it. That language isn't accidental, it's conditioning. Because once someone believes they are built to endure more, they stop questioning why they must. This is how institutions survive corruption for centuries, not by force, but by training certain people to normalize imbalance. Think about it. Why are some always expected to help without being asked? Why are their boundaries treated like betrayal? Why does the system panic the moment they hesitate? Because the structure was never designed to function without their silent compliance. And when compliance is finally withdrawn, the illusion cracks. This is why families react with confusion when the strong one stops responding immediately. Why the silence feels threatening, why guilt appears so quickly, dressed as concern. Are you okay? You seem distant. We're worried about you. Translation: your absence is destabilizing the hierarchy. In every fallen empire, there is a moment historians now recognize as the beginning of the end, not when enemies attacked, not when money ran out, but when the people who carried the weight quietly stopped. The Roman legions mutinied, the serfs left the land, the scribes stopped recording lies as truth, and the elite always reacted the same way: shock first, then outrage, then moral pressure. Because they didn't lose a helper, they lost an assumption. This is the moment most people retreat. They feel the discomfort and rush to restore balance. Even if that balance was crushing them, but a different path exists, a path so old it has been erased from modern teaching. It begins when the one who was always last does something unthinkable. They pause, they do nothing, and in that stillness they realize something forbidden. The world does not collapse without their sacrifice. That realization is not empowering, it is terrifying, because it means everything you were taught about your role was never about love. It was about control. And once you see that, you are no longer falling, you are awakening. Now comes the part they never prepare you for. What happens after you stop playing your assigned role? History calls this phase disorder. Psychology calls it withdrawal. Power structures call it betrayal. But in truth, it is exposure. Because the moment you stop compensating, the cracks that were always there become impossible to hide. In ancient temples, there was a ritual called the removal of the keystone. take away the silent support, and the structure reveals whether it was sacred or just balanced on deception. Families are no differ. When the last one stops giving, people don't just lose resources, they lose identity. The favored child feels fear not because they're helpless, but because they've never been required to build internal strength. The parents feel confusion not because they're cruel, but because the system worked for them. And you feel something even more dangerous, clarity. You begin to notice patterns that were once invisible. How urgency appears only when you are needed. How affection increases right before requests. How your worth has always been measured by your usefulness. This is not imagination. This is pattern recognition activating for the first time. And here is where psychological control systems escalate. In cults, when a member starts pulling away, leaders respond in 3 stages. Love bombing, moral pressure, fear. Families follow the same script. You're praised for being different again, but now it sounds anxious. You're reminded of shared history, as if memory equals obligation. You're warned subtly about consequences, distance, regret, loss. What they are really saying is this: if you change, we must also change, and we are not ready. Ancient rulers understood this moment well. They called it the point of no return. Because once the truth is seen, compliance can never feel innocent again. This is why so many people return to their place. Not because they were wrong, but because the pressure to remain small is immense. But the ones who don't return become something else. They begin separating, not emotionally at first, but structurally, energy, time, access. In secret societies, this was known as closing the gates. Not to punish, but to prevent extraction. You stop explaining, you stop justifying, you stop rescuing, and that's when the system panics, because now it must reveal its final weapon: crisis. Something goes wrong, something expensive, something urgent, and everyone turns toward you, not with words, but with expectation. This is the test. This is where history decides whether you are a temporary anomaly or the beginning of a collapse, and what you do next will redefine not just your place in the family, but your place in the hierarchy of your own life. This is the midpoint, and if you feel unsettled right now, that's because the conditioning is loosening. Ancient initiations were designed this way on purpose. Halfway in, the initiate was forced to choose: return to comfort or continue into truth. This is where power structures reveal themselves most clearly, not in stability, but in crisis, because crisis is never random. It is the lever. In history, when a subordinate stopped obeying silently, rulers didn't ask for loyalty. They manufactured urgency, a war, a debt, a scandal, something that demanded sacrifice now, and always the same justification followed: if you don't help, everything falls apart. Listen carefully. That sentence is a confession. It admits the system only works if you bleed quietly. This is why the call always comes suddenly. Why details are vague. Why emotion replaces logic. They don't want analysis. They want reflex. They are counting on the old version of you, the one who moved before thinking, the one who equated love with fixing. But something has changed. For the first time, you don't rush. You ask a question instead: what happens if I don't? And when that question lands, the room goes cold, because that question has ended dynasties. It has collapsed churches. It has dismantled family empires built on unspoken labor. In that silence, you see it clearly: they never planned for your autonomy, only your availability. This is the moment you are meant to feel guilt, because guilt is the chain that keeps strong people obedient. But understand this hidden truth: guilt only works on those who still believe the system is fair. Once you see the imbalance, guilt loses authority. And this is where identity transformation locks in. Right now, yes, right now. If this is resonating, I want you to do something deliberate, something symbolic. In the comments, type this phrase twice: I reclaim my position. I reclaim my position. Not for me, for you, because language has always been the first tool of control. And reclaiming it is the first act of rebellion. This is not engagement. This is declaration. Back to the descent. When you refuse the automatic rescue, something extraordinary happens. The system is forced to negotiate, not emotionally, structurally. You introduce terms, conditions, boundaries written, not implied. And for the first time, you are no longer family infrastructure. You are an independent power node. This is why they call it cold. Why they say you've changed. Why they compare you to banks, strangers, outsiders. Because you have stepped out of the myth and into reality. And reality does not run on guilt. It runs on agreements. From this point forward, nothing returns to how it was. The illusion of unconditional access is gone. What remains is truth, and truth, once introduced into a closed system, never leaves without consequences. Here is the part they never forgive you for: not the refusal, not the boundaries, the precedent. Because once a system learns you can say no, it can never unknow it. History records this reaction with brutal consistency. When a dependent hierarchy is exposed, it does not reform gracefully. It resists. In ancient courts, when a steward demanded contracts instead of loyalty, he was called disloyal. When scribes insisted on records instead of trust, they were accused of betrayal. When soldiers asked for pay instead of promises, they were branded traitors, not because they were wrong, but because they disrupted the myth. Families respond the same way. Your structure forces them to confront something terrifying. Their survival was subsidized by your silence. So that narrative shifts. You are no longer strong. You are cold. You are selfish. You are keeping score. These accusations are not emotional reactions. They are strategic, because if they can make you feel immoral, they don't have to examine the morality of the system. This is the oldest deflection in power history. Turn the boundary into the crime. But here is the suppressed truth buried in every fallen hierarchy. Structure exposes intentions. If help was truly about love, terms would not feel threatening if support was mutual. Accountability would not feel like punishment. The anger you encounter now is not because you asked for too much. It is because you asked for clarity, and clarity is lethal to systems built on assumption. This is why the next phase is always emotional warfare, tears without responsibility, urgency without transparency, apologies that circle the pain but never touch the pattern. They want relief, not change. In ancient mystery schools, this phase was called the testing of resolve. The initiate was tempted with guilt, status, belonging, anything to pull them back into role. Most returned here because standing alone feels dangerous when you've been trained to exist as support. But those who endured learned a rare truth. Isolation is temporary. Self-betrayal is permanent. You begin to see that love without boundaries is extraction, that loyalty without reciprocity is servitude, that family without accountability is hierarchy disguised as warmth. And something irreversible happens. You stop negotiating your worth. Not loudly, not dramatically. Internally, the need to be understood fades, the impulse to explain dissolves. You realize something ancient rulers feared above all else. A person who no longer needs permission cannot be controlled. From here on, the system will adapt or wither, not because you demanded dominance, but because you removed access. And that is when the balance of power truly shifts, because power was never taken from you. It was returned. What happens next is rarely spoken about, because it doesn't look dramatic. There is no explosion, no final confrontation, no victorious speech. Instead, there is reconfiguration. In ancient states, when a labor class withdrew cooperation, rulers didn't always fall immediately. First, they adapted, they reduced expectations, they renegotiated reality. Families do the same. After the anger burns out, something colder appears. Assessment. They begin to measure you differently now. Not by what you give, but by what you withhold. Conversations become cautious. Requests become formal. Affection becomes conditional in a new way. Not as leverage, but as uncertainty, because they no longer know where your edge is. This is the moment you feel the strangest emotion of all. Peace mixed with grief. Peace because the pressure is gone. Grief because you finally see what was never real, the closeness you thought exist. Ed was proximity, not intimacy. The love you believed was unconditional was stability, dependent. The role you played was not chosen because you were valued. It was chosen because you were reliable, and reliability is exploitable. This is where men either regress or evolve. Regression looks like this: softening boundaries to restore harmony, taking responsibility for other people's discomfort, mistaking silence for abandonment. Evolution looks different. You allow the distance. You let the awkwardness breathe. You stop rushing to stabilize emotions that are not yours. In psychological warfare, this is known as non-engagement. not aggression, not retreat, refusal to be pulled back into the old game. You begin living forward instead of backward, planning without contingency for rescue missions, investing energy where it compounds instead of drains. And something subtle but profound happens over time. Your nervous system recalibrates. You stop flinching at messages, stop anticipating crises, stop scanning for cues that you are needed. That constant low-grade alertness you thought was responsibility. That was control residue. As it fades, clarity sharpens. You realize how many decisions you postponed, how many risks you avoided, how much of your life was built around being available instead of being free. Ancient philosophers warned rulers of this exact outcome. They said if the burden bearer wakes up, he becomes dangerous, not to others but to the lie, because a man who no longer derives identity from sacrifice cannot be manipulated with guilt, urgency, or praise. This is when the hierarchy collapses quietly, not because you destroyed it, but because you stopped feeding it, and the final truth emerges, simple and irreversible. You were never last because you were lesser. You were last because you were strong enough to carry what others could not, but strength was never meant to be a sentence. It was meant to be a choice. And now, it finally is where the descent ends, not in darkness but in sight. Every forbidden system once exposed leaves behind the same realization. You were never meant to stay inside it forever. Ancient initiations ended this way. The initiate did not return to overthrow the elders. He returned changed. Because the greatest threat to a corrupt hierarchy is not rebellion, it is independence. By now, you understand something most men never articulate. Being placed last was not a verdict on your worth, it was evidence of your capacity. You were chosen to carry weight because you could, but capacity mistaken for obligation becomes exploitation. This is the secret hidden in plain sight across history. The strongest are not enslaved with chains, they are enslaved with responsibility. Once you step out, the past loses its grip, not because it disappears, but because it no longer defines you. The family may stabilize, or it may fracture. Both outcomes reveal Ruth. If it adapts, it proves the system was capable of change all along. If it collapses, it proves it was sustained by imbalance. Either way, you are no longer the foundation beneath someone else's life. You become the architect of your own. This is why the old world fears men who choose themselves, not men who dominate, men who withdraw consent. Empires cannot survive without unpaid labor. Institutions cannot persist without silent carriers. Families cannot maintain false hierarchies without someone absorbing the cost. When that person steps away, something sacred happens. Reality reasserts itself. And here is the final dangerous truth. You do not need to be chosen. You do not need to be understood. You do not need permission to matter. Your value was never granted. It was always inherent. The moment you stopped proving, fixing, rescuing, you didn't abandon anyone. You ended a cycle. If this reached something in you, don't ignore it. Awareness is not comfort. It is responsibility. Carry this forward, not as resentment, but as discipline. Build a life where your strength is invested, not extracted, where loyalty is mutual, not assumed, where love does not require erasure, because the most dangerous man in any system is not the one who fights it, it is the one who walks away whole. And once you've done that, they can never rank you again.